The story begins on a cold morning in the mid-1990s in a small Chinese city. Outside the gates of an orphanage, a newborn baby girl was discovered, wrapped in a thin, faded pink blanket. The staff found her shivering, her tiny cries echoing against the stone walls. No note, no name, no sign of who had left her there. Only the fragile bundle of life remained, carrying the silent weight of a decision no one could fully understand. At that time in China, countless families faced harsh realities. Poverty, strict population policies, and social pressures often forced parents into heartbreaking choices. To the orphanage staff, this was not the first abandoned child they had seen. But something about this little girl's bright, searching eyes made her unforgettable. Within weeks, news of the baby reached across the ocean. In the United States, a couple named Sarah and Michael had been dreaming of becoming parents. They had faced years of infertility, and their hearts longed for a child to love. When they saw the photo of the baby girl with wide, dark eyes staring at the camera, they felt an instant connection. The adoption process was long and filled with paperwork, interviews, and waiting. But Sarah and Michael never wavered. Months later, they boarded a plane to China, carrying with them hope, nervous excitement, and a small white dress they had chosen for their daughter. When the day finally came, the orphanage director carried the little girl into the room where Sarah and Michael waited. The moment was surreal. Sarah fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "She's ours." Michael, holding back his own tears, reached out his arms. The little girl, only 1 year old, was placed in their embrace. In that instant, a new family was born. They named her Emily. And from that day on, she was no longer the child abandoned at the orphanage gates. She was their daughter. But as joyful as that beginning was, the journey ahead would not be without questions, struggles, and the longing of a girl caught between two worlds. What would you do in her place? Would you search for your past? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of Emily's journey. Emily's first memories were sunlit and warm. A kitchen in Massachusetts that smelled like fresh cinnamon rolls on Saturdays, a yellow lab named Cooper, who believed tennis balls were a religion, and a nursery wall with watercolor cranes flying over painted lotus ponds. Sarah kept a baby book with glued-in Polaroids and yogurt-smudged milestones. Michael built a wooden bookshelf and filled it with picture books about faraway places. From the beginning, they made sure Emily knew two truths at once. She was wholly theirs, and she came from somewhere beautifully her own. Every spring, they drove to Boston's Chinatown, where red lanterns bobbed like tiny planets over the street. Sarah would buy sesame balls still warm in their paper bag, and Michael, who learned a few phrases from a community class, would practice ni hao with patient shopkeepers, earning smiles and extra almond cookies for Emily. On Mid-Autumn Festival, the family shared mooncakes at the dining table while Sarah read legends of Chang'e and the Jade Rabbit. Emily loved the stories, yet they also pulled at a thin thread inside her, the one that hummed, "You belong to more than one sky." At school, she was the only Chinese girl in her class until 3rd grade. Friends asked innocent questions that didn't feel innocent. "Where are you really from? Do you speak Chinese at home?" A substitute teacher once said, "You're so lucky your parents saved you." And Emily watched Sarah's jaw tighten later as she explained gently that families begin in all kinds of ways. Rescue is not the right word. Love is. Still, words sometimes stuck like burrs. On the playground, a boy tugged at the corners of his eyes and sang something sing-songy and cruel. Emily didn't tell her parents until years later because she didn't have the vocabulary for the ache, only the sense that a door had closed somewhere inside. There were bright places, too. In 6th grade, Emily joined a Saturday culture class at a community center, where children adopted from China practiced brush calligraphy and learned dim sum vocabulary. She loved tracing shui for snow, the ink softening into the paper like breath on glass. The teacher, Auntie Lynn, wore jade earrings and told them, "Your names carry bridges." Emily tucked that sentence into her pocket and carried it for years. At 13, she found a small red silk pouch at the bottom of a memory box Sarah kept. Tucked inside was a single tiger charm on a thin, frayed string. Sarah explained the orphanage had sent it home with them, a token placed beside the baby the day she was found. Emily rolled the charm in her palm, feeling an invisible hand reaching from the past. "Do you think my mother tied this on me?" she asked. Sarah paused. "I don't know, sweetheart, but someone wanted you to be brave." High school brought orchestra, cello, soccer, left wing, and a best friend named Maya who wore glittery nail polish and asked the right kind of questions. How do you feel when people assume things? The two planned college tours and ate spicy noodles whenever they had a terrible day. When senior year arrived, Emily wrote her admissions essay about bridges, about learning to be the beam that holds two shores together. She was accepted to a university in New York, and the city felt like a chorus of languages, none of them demanding she choose only one. Yet in the quiet of her dorm, the questions knocked again. Who had tied the tiger charm? Did she look like her mother? Was there a laugh she had inherited, a sneeze, a stubborn wrinkle between the brows? On late nights, she searched online forums where adult adoptees shared stories of going back to China, some finding nothing, others stumbling on miracles. She learned about finding ads, old newspaper notices that sometimes preserved the date and location where a baby was discovered, and about community volunteers who helped reconnect fragments of the past. She bookmarked pages and closed them, opened them again, closed them. One winter break, while helping Michael bring down holiday decorations from the attic, a shallow cardboard box skidded toward her feet. Inside lay copies of adoption documents, yellowing around the edges. There was an official photo, Emily at 11 months, gaze unwavering. Below, a typed line. Found near the east gate of Lihua Orphanage, October 17, 1995. Tucked behind the photo, almost invisible, was a torn corner of a calendar page, the month printed in Chinese characters, the day circled in pencil. On the back, faintly, a single character. Fu, fortune. Emily sat on the attic floor, the insulation smelling faintly of dust and pine. "Mom?" she called. Sarah climbed the ladder and knelt beside her. They read the papers together, and Sarah placed an arm around her shoulders the way she had done 1,000 times since that first day in China. "I kept thinking," Sarah whispered, "that when you wanted to know more, we would face it with you." That night, Emily set the tiger charm, the calendar scrap, and the photocopied finding note on her desk like constellations. For the first time, the ache rearranged itself into a shape that looked like resolve. She didn't yet know what she would uncover, or whether the answers would soothe or sting, but she knew she could not keep living half-asked questions. "Maybe I go back," she said aloud to the empty room, testing the words. "Maybe I try." Have you ever held an old object and felt it hum with questions? If it were you, would you follow that thread back to where it began? She drafted an email to the orphanage, to a volunteer group that specialized in finding ads, and, hesitating only a moment, to a DNA database that matched relatives across continents. Before she hit send, she looked at a photo on her wall. Sarah and Michael grinning in a crowded Beijing airport, a small bundle in their arms. "Whatever I find," she whispered, "I carry you with me." But then something unexpected happened. A reply from China arrived faster than she imagined, with a detail no one had noticed before, one that could change everything about the search ahead. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Emily had barely sipped her coffee when the notification pinged across her laptop. The sender's address was written in Chinese characters she recognized only from years of half-studied calligraphy. She clicked, heart racing. The message was from a volunteer archivist in Nanjing who specialized in scanning old adoption records. He explained that when Emily's orphanage submitted finding ads to the local newspaper in the 1990s, they sometimes included small handwritten notes left with the child. Most were destroyed or misplaced, but, he wrote, one fragile scrap of writing may still exist in our archive. It is associated with your case file. Emily froze. For 24 years, she had believed there was nothing, just an anonymous baby on a blanket. Now there was the possibility of a voice from the past. She called Sarah and Michael that night on video chat. "Do you want me to read it with you?" Sarah asked gently. Emily nodded. Her screen split into 3 faces, 3 corners of the same family, waiting together. The archivist's second email contained a photo attachment. The scrap of paper looked yellowed and brittle, written in faded pencil strokes. In shaky characters it read, Born under the mid-autumn moon. We cannot keep her safe. Forgive us. Tears blurred Emily's vision. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth. Michael whispered, "They loved you. They didn't leave because they didn't care." For the first time, Emily felt the ache of abandonment bend into something more complicated. Grief, yes, but also proof that her birth parents had thought of her, mourned her, begged forgiveness. That night she couldn't sleep. She opened a map of China on her phone and traced the province where Lihua Orphanage once stood. A new certainty settled in her chest. She needed to go there, walk the streets, breathe the air, and maybe, just maybe, find the people who had written those words. Within months, Emily saved enough from her campus job and summer internship to buy a ticket. Sarah and Michael insisted on coming along. "We were with you at the beginning," Sarah said. "We'll be with you now." Emily hugged them both, gratitude heavy in her throat. The flight to Beijing was long, filled with restless sleep and looping thoughts. She wondered, would her parents still be alive? Would they even want to see her? Would they feel shame, fear, joy? When they landed, the city swallowed them whole, horns blaring, bicycles weaving between cars, neon signs flashing characters Emily struggled to decipher. With the help of a local guide arranged by the volunteer group, they traveled to the provincial town where the orphanage once stood. The building was gone, replaced by a new community center. But the guide introduced them to an elderly woman who had worked there during the 90s. Her hair was white, her steps slow, but when she saw the photo of baby Emily, her eyes widened. "I remember her," she said in Mandarin, translated softly by the guide. So alert. She never stopped watching the door, as if waiting for someone. The woman explained that babies were usually found with nothing, but Emily had arrived with the tiger charm and the scrap of paper. It was clear her parents wanted her to be remembered, she said. Then lowering her voice, she added, "I think they may have lived in a village not far from here. A couple once came to ask about a baby girl left in October. They were crying, desperate for news." Emily's breath caught. Could it be them? The guide promised to follow the lead and arranged meetings in nearby villages. The next days blurred into bus rides and narrow dirt paths, humble houses with tiled roofs and conversations that opened doors into lives lived in quiet endurance. Most led nowhere. But on the fourth day, they arrived at a small farming village, where a woman with weathered hands listened to Emily's story, her eyes widening with every detail. "My neighbors," she whispered. "They lost a daughter that year. They never stopped mourning." Emily's heart thundered as the woman pointed to a small house at the edge of the fields. Smoke curled from its chimney, the sun dipping low behind the hills. Sarah squeezed her hand, Michael steady at her other side. She stood frozen at the path, staring at the house that might hold her beginning. Questions swirled like autumn leaves. What if they rejected her? What if they had moved on? What if seeing her opened wounds too deep to bear? But something inside her whispered that she had come too far to turn back. She stepped forward, and as she did, the door to the house opened, and a man and woman emerged, drawn by some invisible pull, their faces carrying years of unspoken longing. The couple stepped into the fading light, their silhouettes etched against the fields. The woman's hair was streaked with gray, her hands rough from years of labor, yet her eyes, wide, searching, were the mirror of Emily's own. The man stood tall beside her, shoulders slightly stooped, as though carrying a weight that had never lifted. The guide spoke first, explaining softly who Emily was and why she had come. The woman covered her mouth, trembling, while the man gripped the wooden doorframe for support. Then, almost in unison, they moved forward. Emily's chest ached as she walked the last few steps. When she finally stood before them, the woman reached out, hesitated, then cupped Emily's face with both hands. Tears spilled as she whispered words Emily didn't understand, but didn't need to. Love translated without language. The man's voice broke as he said something to the guide, who relayed it. "We thought about her every day. We never stopped praying she was alive." The air seemed to dissolve. Emily collapsed into their embrace, and for a long moment, 3 hearts beat against one another, years of absence collapsing into the warmth of touch. Sarah and Michael stood nearby, tears streaming. watching their daughter find the piece of herself she had been searching for. Inside the modest home, the family sat together at a small wooden table. The mother, Mrs. Liu, poured tea with trembling hands, as if afraid the dream might vanish if she stopped moving. The father, Mr. Liu, told their story in fragments, how they had lived in poverty during the one-child policy era, how family pressure and fear of punishment had forced them into an impossible choice. "We loved her," he said, voice breaking, "but we had no way. It was the hardest night of our lives." Emily listened, her heart torn open. For years she had feared she was unwanted. Now she saw the truth. She had been desperately loved, but trapped in circumstances beyond control. She showed them the tiger charm and the fragile scrap of paper. Mrs. Liu gasped, pressing the paper to her chest. "I wrote this," she whispered, through the translator. "I wanted her to know it was not abandonment. It was sorrow." The hours passed with stories, laughter through tears, and the cautious joy of catching up on decades lost. Mrs. Liu asked about Emily's childhood, and Emily told them about Cooper the dog, about cello recitals, about mooncakes shared at the table with Sarah and Michael. Mr. Liu smiled and said, "She had 2 moons then, one in America, one in China." Yet amidst the joy, Emily felt a pang of guilt. She looked at Sarah and Michael, sitting quietly, giving her space. These were the parents who had raised her, who had walked her through every scraped knee in graduation, who had stood beside her even now. Would they feel replaced? Would they believe she was slipping away? That evening, Emily asked them privately, her voice trembling, "Are you okay? I don't want you to feel like I'm choosing between you." Sarah took her hand. "Sweetheart, love isn't a pie that runs out when you share it. Meeting them doesn't erase us, it adds to your story, and we are proud of you for being brave enough to face it." Michael nodded, his eyes glassy. "Family isn't a competition. It's a gift. And you have more family than you realized." The next morning, the Lius invited Emily and her parents to the village square, where neighbors gathered. Some had known the story for years, whispering about the baby lost under the mid-autumn moon. When Emily appeared, many gasped at the resemblance, murmuring blessings. An elderly woman pressed an orange into Emily's hands, a symbol of fortune. The Lius beamed with pride. Their daughter returned not as a ghost of regret, but as a living, breathing miracle. Emily felt the threads of her life weaving together. 2 families, 2 worlds, yet one beating heart that belonged to both. Still, one final question lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. How could she honor both families without losing herself in between? The days that followed unfolded like a dream Emily never wanted to wake from. She walked through the rice fields with Mrs. Liu, who showed her the spot where she used to imagine a daughter running at her side. She helped Mr. Liu repair a squeaky wooden gate, watching how his hands worked, realizing she had inherited his stubborn concentration. At night, the house filled with voices. Her biological parents sharing memories of their youth, Sarah and Michael chiming in with stories of Emily's first steps, her Halloween costumes, her college essays. 2 families, once separated by oceans and silence, sat together under a single roof. But the unspoken tension remained. Where did Emily truly belong? On the final evening before her return to the U.S., the families gathered for dinner. A chicken stew simmered on the stove, and the table was lined with steamed buns and stir-fried greens. Emily looked around, her heart caught between gratitude and grief. She knew she could not stay, but she also knew she would never leave them behind again. Raising her glass of tea, she stood. The room fell silent. She turned first to the Lius. "I came here searching for answers," she began, her voice shaking. "I wanted to understand why I was left behind. And now I see the truth. You didn't stop loving me. You loved me so much you made a sacrifice no one should ever have to make. For that, I forgive you. And for giving me life, I thank you." Mrs. Liu wept openly, reaching across the table for her daughter's hand. "Mr." Liu bowed his head, tears dripping silently onto his bowl. Then Emily turned to Sarah and Michael. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. "And you? You gave me more than a home. You gave me love, laughter, and the freedom to become myself. You never once let me feel less than whole. You are my parents in every way that matters. So from the deepest part of my heart, thank you, Mom and Dad. Sarah sobbed quietly, Michael wrapping an arm around her as if to hold them both steady. The room seemed to glow with something larger than words. Acceptance, forgiveness, the rare miracle of love that multiplies instead of divides. Later that night, Emily stepped outside. The moon hung high, round and luminous, just as it had the night she was born, the night her parents had made an impossible choice. She felt the weight of the tiger charm in her pocket, the symbol of bravery that had carried her this far. She realized she wasn't torn between two worlds after all. She was the bridge, strong enough to hold both. When it was time to leave, promises were made. The Lius swore they would keep in touch, sending letters and photos. Sarah and Michael embraced them warmly, no longer strangers, but extended family. At the airport, Emily looked back at both sets of parents, standing side by side, waving. For the first time in her life, she felt completely whole. And as the plane lifted into the clouds, she whispered to herself the words that carried her story. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Moral of the story: family is not limited by borders, blood, or circumstance. It is built by love, sacrifice, and the courage to open our hearts wider than we ever imagined. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in the power of love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. What does family mean to you?